So in this week's video, I am going to answer one of the questions that was submitted on the Ask Diana page. So if you don't already know, I have a form on my website, truetoyoucounseling.com, where you can submit anonymous questions and I will answer them. And these can be completely anonymous, so you don't have to put in any of your information if you don't want to. If you do, you can put in an email and I can respond to you directly as well. Or you can just completely anonymously submit your question, and then you'll just have to check back on the YouTube page and on my website to see when I answer your question. So this week I'm answering the question, being a rape victim, how is it possible to have rape sex fantasies as an adult? So this is such a great question, and really the questions that I wanted to create safe space for on here. So this is a question that you probably can't, just ask anyone, or you wouldn't want to ask anybody, and probably something that you also wouldn't want to admit that's happening. So this is the perfect kind of question. All questions are open, but this is perfect because it's not safe to just talk about with anybody, and there's probably some shame around it. So without knowing more, I'm just going to kind of talk through a few things that come to mind, and kind of how this could happen, and also say that I don't think it's abnormal. I think that this is kind of a normal response and probably is happening to a lot of people. So thank you for asking this question. So one, sometimes as a response to trauma, we can sort of change the relationship of that to survive, right? So sometimes when people are really traumatized by something, they will integrate it into their fantasies. And I see that happen a lot, actually. So people that have maybe early childhood trauma or, trauma as an adult, sometimes they integrate that into their fantasies. And sometimes I think that's kind of a coping strategy, right? So a way to get through and a way to cope is by sort of changing the relationship to that a little bit. And this isn't something that you consciously do, right? So no one's like, oh, I was traumatized as a kid, I'm going to add this into my fantasy. That obviously that doesn't happen. It's more of a subconscious thing, and it's just kind of how you process things, and that's sort of what happens. The thing that's really complicated too about sexual issues and sexual urges and sexual trauma is there's so many mixed things happening and mixed emotions happening, and that's really complicated for a lot of people. So I work with people who feel guilt and shame about maybe some of their trauma, maybe because sometimes it was arousing to them, or sometimes that's how the person baited them in, and it's confusing, and people don't know how to place it and how to process it and what to do with it. Or they'll put it on themselves and feel guilty about it themselves when, it was trauma, it was rape, it wasn't consensual, but they'll put that on themselves because there's so many mixed feelings about it. And sometimes the body can respond when the mind doesn't. So it's so complicated. It's really difficult. But I do see this kind of thing happen. And sometimes people will act out kind of early trauma and not even realize it in their sex life. So, that could be happening as well. The other thought that comes to mind too is that I'm sort of all over the place. But another reason why kind of sexual fantasies and issues get complicated is, so I deal with a lot of fetishes. That means that they've crossed the line in some way. They've crossed the line. They're no longer in control. Maybe you're no longer in control of your urges, or it's the only way you can be aroused, or whatever. So it's crossed the line, but it's normal at some point, right? So that's also really complicated. So having, kind of a rape fantasy or, bondage of some sort, that's a pretty common fantasy, actually. It's a pretty common fantasy, but it's more typically in sort of the normal realm. It's not. It actually would be consensual, right? So it actually would be consensual, but it's more about control or being taken, or maybe there's a surprise element or whatever it is. There's a lot of that people find arousing, but it's actually consensual. Okay, so the fantasy about that is actually consensual. They want that. Maybe they act it out with a partner, and there's clear lines of what's okay and what's not okay. So that's a consensual fantasy, but it has those elements. Okay, but if it was actually not consensual, that's not okay, right? That's not okay. So there's pieces of that are normal. So it's normal to have those kind of fantasies or have those kind of things that you like, and that's okay. My assumption too is when you say, the person that asked this question, when you say that you kind of have those fantasies as an adult, that there's so much more to that, right? That there's a lot more going on in your head. I imagine that it would be consensual, that it would actually be something that you want. Maybe it's, that creates a safety around that because your choice is taken away a little bit. So there's a lot of shame around sexuality, particularly if you're raised in really conservative communities or cultures. There's a lot of shame around sexuality. So sometimes having a fantasy that sort of takes away your choice a little bit, that creates safety because it's like, oh, well, then it's okay because it wasn't really my choice. So sometimes I see that more there too, because it's almost like a way to make that fantasy okay. I don't know if that makes sense, or if I need to kind of clarify that. Please comment or ask any questions on this. I try to be as sort of just genuine when I answer these questions, like I would if you were asking me in person. So I don't prep or outline or anything. So this is sort of just kind of my thoughts on this. The other thing that I think would be important to address, and maybe as you move forward in kind of processing this, would be, is this something that's okay for you? So is this a fantasy that's okay for you and that you're okay with and you like? You just maybe want to kind of work through it a little bit and process it a little bit? Or is it something that really bothers you? Like it comes up and it really is bothersome and you want to work through it. So that's something that I would say spend some time thinking about, and maybe processing through a little bit, because if it's something that you don't like and it is bothering you, maybe that means you need to process it a little more, and maybe there's more trauma there that needs to be undone. And when that's sort of worked through a little bit, then maybe that will go away. Or maybe it's more that there's some, feelings about you, about yourself, about your worth, maybe about your sexuality, about your urges, about your fantasies. Maybe that's some stuff that needs to be worked through, and then you kind of come to a place where you feel more okay with yourself and your urges, and it will even out a little bit. So I would say also, spend some time thinking about whether this is really a problem for you or whether it's okay. And it's just sort of part of you and who you are, and there's a bigger picture to it. So it's not just about what happened to you. It's not just about the rape. It's about you coming into your own and your own sexuality and kind of reframing that and owning that and figuring out what you actually like, in a really consensual way, in a way that's about you. So those are some of my thoughts about it. I would definitely say get some support and work through this. This is a big thing to work through alone, so get some support and work through it. If you have a therapist, I would say, talk to them about it more. If you're thinking about talking to them about it more, this is something that I would be happy to talk to you more about and work with you more on. This is sort of my field, and one of the things that I specialize in a lot is sort of working through these really complicated things and these issues. So please feel free to reach out to me. Sorry guys, I have a bit of a sore throat still. But yeah, please feel free to reach out to me. And if any of you watching this have kind of sub questions or questions that come up as you're watching this, please submit them and ask them, and I'm happy to go over that more too as well. So thank you.